Hi and welcome everybody. Thanks for dropping by. This is a two-part video, and in this video we're going to take a look at who was at fault with regards to the Irish Protocol problems and why Johnson and any Brexiteer that is shouting now for scrap the protocol, WTO is either completely bananas, self-delusional, or an absolute 100% liar. Like most topics discussed on these videos, we like to look at things from a general view first. We like to recognize the problems and obviously suggest solutions if there are any. Now, the first question has to be, why is there an Irish protocol? And could it have been avoided? I mean, there wasn't a border there before, so why is there a border there now? Well, the answer to that one is a little complicated, slightly complicated, because on the one hand, the Brexit campaign, led by highly educated people with a high degree of political savvy, played a populist game through the media. While on the Remain side, they relied on rolling out experts and then categorised each Brexit issue as being of such a calamity that the UK was about to succumb to a state of economic depression on biblical terms if she left. So in essence, both campaigns were wrong, but it has to be said categorically that the Brexit campaign simply swept reality of nuclear danger under a carpet. But the Remainers spent so much time in the destructive counter-arguments of doom and gloom that quite frankly the public became confused and also disinterested. Now, however, since this vote was carried, the problem that we were told was absolutely zero, no hassle, well, guess what? It has really become the focus of so much attention that even I get bored with it. But such a cavalier attitude is fraught with danger for something that is so desperately important. Now, it's really quite simple. And let's look at it in local terms. If a business applies for a loan, it must present a realistic proposal to the bank. Now, the bank, just like the voters in this case, are not experts in the field of activity that the loan application is involved in, or at least normally the bank isn't, and normally the person applying for the loan would be an expert in it. So if the bank sees an application for the loan has a part of their business plan that has a dependency on some unknown technology or some known entity, they're going to ask a lot of questions. And if they're not satisfied with those questions, they'll ask for proof from experts. The fact is, and let's not be in any doubt here, the experts in the field of international trade are not the EU. They are not the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. They're not the Ministry for Trade. They're not even the Ministry for Home Affairs. They're not. Simply, the experts in the field of borders, electronic or otherwise, are the people that have to deal with such matters both on a daily basis and on a global scale. And that's the WTO. And their experts asked, what technology are you talking about? Now, is that to say that technology won't happen or couldn't happen? Well, no, it could happen. But as Pascal Lamy, the former head of the WTO, said, and I quote him here, there needs to be a lot greater advancement, firstly in the technology. Secondly, that technology needs to deliver results that support the expenditure of the individual member states, and it must be accepted worldwide, or else it's basically a non-runner. Now, but here's the fraud being propagated currently by Brexit rhetoric, and could explain perhaps why Farage, although I don't even like saying his name, is only talking about immigration now, and Frost doesn't mention the WTO anymore and just sticks with Article 16 all the time as a defence to the Belfast Protocol. Now, here's the problem. The WTO is in crisis, and there's a very, very real possibility that just as the once lauded and powerful League of Nations succumbed to the authority of the United Nations, the WTO could fail and disappear into insignificance. Why? Well, the answer is quite simple. The WTO is made up of 157 countries. It has two principal functions. One, it develops international trade rules, and B, it administers judgments on any but disputes among its members. Pretty straightforward and all is good. Now, it has administered these judgments since 1995. And by the way, could I point out that it's the UK that set up the WTO, but it administers these judgments under what's known as the Appellate body. Now, this body's decisions, and only this body's decisions within the WTO, are binding. And those that do not adhere to those judgments can be faced with real economic sanctions. Now, for simplicity's sake, we will refer to it as a court, because basically that's what it does. It dispenses justice. This court is supposed to have 7 sitting judges throughout the WTO at any one time, and their job is to apply that law. This person is required to, number 1, have recognized authority, and number 2, really be able to demonstrate expertise in the law and in international trade. But things had already gotten so bad, and this is in the time of 2016, 2017, okay? It had got so bad that the members of the WTO had become increasingly frustrated with all 3 of its main functions, which they saw as monitoring, providing the forum to negotiate the new trade, and most importantly, arbitrating in trade disputes. In those months of 2018 and 2017, there was an effort to reform the WTO, and it was required quite clearly what the US ambassador to the WTO, Dennis Shea, termed the autumn of WTO reform is required. And in October of 2018, Canada hosted a meeting of 12 other trade ministers from Brazil, the EU, and Japan to discuss possible reforms to the WTO. China and the US, they weren't invited, okay? Oh, and by the way, by the end of that meeting, the die was cast. This is 2018, and nobody tried to appoint any more judges, as it was going to be a waste of time. So, as the politicians like Frost, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, like Farage, like Johnson, were talking in 2018, 2019, 2020, we'll leave on WTO, this is gone, this is gone. They knew very well that the WTO was falling apart at the seams. And the problem right now, being faced by the WTO, is there are no more judges. The whole thing is a complete mess because, though this is not the only reason, the United States, under the past 3 presidents, has blocked those replacements in a protest to the way the WTO does its business. Okay? Now, Trump completed that whole exercise by pulling completely out of it. And though Biden has kind of put his toe back in, it is obvious by his choice of appointment of Catherine Tai. Catherine Tai, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, I think Tai or T, anyway, as head of the trade negotiation, who has already echoed the views that the WTO is not appropriate to the modern day needs. Okay? Now, let's get back to that bank scenario. When the bank receives the business plan, they will have their people check it with the applicant's people. And the bank would have learned that there is no such thing practiced anywhere else on the planet. So we must ask Frost and Johnson, 1, we have to remember, firstly, that the vast majority of the voting public elected MPs were either not born when the UK joined the EEC or EU, or were too young to really know what it was like before the introduction of the free movement of goods, because it was almost 50 years ago. And Frost and Johnson, I believe, were depending on that. They were depending on that ignorance of what could happen. Number two, we also have to take note of the serious development of online sales that has taken place. For example, just in the last 25 years, we've seen sites like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, Craigslist, etc. completely change the playing field. The previously normal retail channels were under pressure. Remember also that new tech has damaged those traditional high street conservative donors to a very large degree. And with the prospect that more than half the UK's retail sales will be online within 10 years, it's going to be a problem. If goods were traded before December 31st, if that continues, they will continue to suffer. These websites like eBay and Amazon and whatever were able to connect with people for specific items. And this changed the whole business profile in the UK. Whether that was in large quantities people could connect, or just for a single product they could connect. And they could do it in just seconds, literally just seconds. Potential customers could get immediate reviews of that product, even get reviews of the supplier, and get to those suppliers easily. But at this very moment, and this is quite important, it changed the whole dynamic of purchasing, selling, and distribution. You see, for centuries, the buying public were limited to what the wholesalers decided was best for the market, and not the end user. That was dictated by the wholesaler's opinion of what they might like. Now, sure, the end user would influence the purchasing by, will they buy it or not? But that's not as much influence as one might think. So, for example, if the wholesaler could get a product to market through their retail distribution channels, only then would the end user see it or be able to buy it off the shelf. Now, many of us have been accustomed to buying, expecting anything we see in a shop to be off the shelf or deliverable within a few days. This was not the case 25 years ago. If you went into a shop and ordered some furniture or a similar item, you could expect a 1, 2, or 3 month delivery schedule. And why? Well, it's simple really. The shop depended on the wholesaler to stock the goods, but the wholesaler would not bring in the goods to their warehouse unless A, they could place an order with their manufacturer that would fill the container with goods and avoid shipping very expensive air. B, they had to wait for those orders to come in through their retail channels to fill that next container. So when the container arrived at the docks, it was made up of just a few items, maybe take for instance sofa sets. So it had maybe 3 different styles of sofa sets, but it had 12 for that customer, 5 for that customer, 6 for that customer, whatever way that went. But it was basically just a couple of items, okay? So though the paperwork was a pain, they did have experienced people to deal with it, and there wasn't a lot, okay? So that's it for part 1, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2. Listen, thank you for watching, and thank you for taking the time to listen to what we're saying here. I do ask you to, do the bell and the subscribe thing, but I look forward to seeing you in part 2.